I'd say a fairly busy and productive last 24 to 48 hours. A lot of work went into this effort with the team. I know Lovey's talked about this. The players did everything that we asked them to do from the beginning of training camp until the end point here. Yesterday, just kind of going through the process. We knew there was some players we were going to have to move on from that, there's a good chance that we would bring them back in the building here in some capacity. So the way we view it as 70 players. It's really 69 plus one, including Dio. And really, it's just trying to build as comprehensive a roster as possible and realizing that we're going to have some depth on the roster. We're going to have some depth off the roster. And essentially, every player that's on the roster, that's on the team, is available to play every week. So that's how we approach it. So we don't kind of separate at 53 and the 16 players on the practice squad. We kind of look at everything in totality, and really everybody earns their opportunity regardless of what that is, regardless of how big their role is going to be, and the players understand that. I would say, yesterday's an emotional day for a lot of different people. I would say there's sadness, there's joy, there's anger, but I think how we try to handle it, we try to be honest, try to be sincere about how we see the player, how we view the player. And essentially the players earn their opportunities. We don't tell them what it is. And I think players are respectful and receptive to the way we handled it. I would say, for the most part, the roster is in place, but I would expect there to be some changes here between now and before we play the Colts. It's just the reality of the NFL. It's just the reality of the way this works, and we're no different than any other team. So I think for the time being, we're at 53 and 15 plus one. We have one open spot in the practice squad here currently. A lot of the players, there's a fair amount of players that we moved on from yesterday that we brought back to put on our practice squad. They'll have a couple other moving parts here on the roster, I would say, over the next, probably 24 hours, guys on the roster that are coming off the roster. So we'll take it one day at a time. I think the training camp portion is behind us. The preseason is behind us. Off to a decent start. Now we kind of reset and recalibrate here, and it's time to get ready to play real football. And really our focus turns to the Colts, and that'll be the first challenge in front of us next week. They got a good football team. Certainly be a big challenge in front of us. I mean, they kicked our ass twice last year, so we got a lot of work in front of us, and hopefully we have a good week of work tomorrow. Players are off for 3 days, and then next week they'll come back in with the right mindset and get ready to play against the Colts and try to take advantage of the opportunity in the opener, a week from Sunday. So with that, I'll take some questions. Brooks, why don't you go ahead and start off?
Could you explain a little bit the decision with Marlon Mack? He's back in the practice squad. What kind of went into the organizing the running back room?
Yeah, I mean, you can carry X number of players on the roster. So, I would say Marlon's had a good training camp. He's a player we wanted to continue to work with in some capacity. There was an opportunity for him to come back to the practice squad. He's had a good attitude. He's worked really hard in the preseason. He's been productive with his opportunities. So, again, this is about, we talked about, you can have X number of players on a roster. You're going to have certain depth at positions you carry on the roster, and then you're going to have some depth off the roster. And all those players are eligible to play on a weekly basis, and that's how they have to approach it. And we also understand that it's not just veteran players, but any player on a practice squad, whether it's for the Texans or throughout the course of the league, is essentially a free agent. So that player can leave at any point to go to a 53-man roster. So whether it's Traylon Arnold, whether it's Marlon Mack, so it's all about the opportunity and what the situation is. So we treat the player the same way. We don't look at him any differently. But, Marlon's been good to work with, and we're happy that we have the opportunity to bring him back on the practice squad. And, nothing's really changed from his perspective or his mindset.
Take a guy like John Owens, on the practice squad 12 times, and cut 5 times. Here he makes his first 53-man roster. What do you think?
Yeah, it speaks to, the word persistence probably applies in that situation. Jonathan's a great kid. He's got a good attitude. He's always had athletic traits and attributes. When you look at some of his measurables, they're as good as any, I would say, defensive back in the league. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good football player because of that, but he has certain traits and characteristics that are appealing. Other teams had seen that, and really, I would say he ran into some bad luck with injuries, I'd say, at different points. He's had some serious injuries, had different injuries, but he never wavered. I'd say he stayed persistent, and last year when he had the opportunity to play, even though it was a short period of time, he took advantage of his opportunity, played really well against the Chargers. Had a good offseason. Nobody trains harder than Jonathan Owens. Nobody works hard in the offseason program. I would say for multiple years since I've got here, he's been one of the most consistent, most diligent players in our program. We're fortunate we got a lot of good players with that mindset and that attitude, and Jonathan's certainly one of them. So this is something, again, like we talked about, Jonathan earned his opportunity, earned his role, whatever that's going to be. I'd say the most important thing for all players to realize, whether you're on a roster or on the practice squad, that things can change pretty quickly. So you have to go out there week to week and establish a certain level of performance and consistency to make sure that you continue to get those opportunities. So, it's certainly a credit to J.O. It's certainly a credit to Joe Dana and the work that he's done. And, Lovey has had a lot of faith and confidence in what Jonathan can do. So, again, it's a nice story, but, the reality is it can change very quickly. But Jonathan's earned his role on his team, and that speaks to his attitude and his persistence. It's kind of staying after it. Go ahead, DJ.
What are some of the expectations for the Texans in 2022?
Yeah, we don't really talk about expectations. I think that's more external. I think our expectations is just try to show up each day, try to have a good day's work, and try to establish a certain level of performance and a standard of performance on a consistent day-to-day basis. Because in the end, that's what it's going to come down to. It's going to be about working hard. It's going to be about doing the right things day after day, week after week, month after month, game after game. Where does that lead? I have no idea. Nobody really knows. So are we a better football team than we were last year? I don't know. We'll find out here come Sunday, or a week from Sunday. But I think as long as we get the right players with the right mindset, that have the right attitude and go about work the right way, then we'll give ourselves a chance. Then it's going to come down to execution and what we do on a field. So ultimately, it's going to come down to probably 8 or 10 plays in each game, and those are going to be situational plays. And if we handle those the right way, we'll win. If we don't, we'll lose. That's just the way the NFL works. So there's a scoreboard at the end of the game, and that's our kind of criteria if things went well or they didn't go well. But we're going to learn a lot about our football team probably in the first month. So we are where we are after about, call it 6 weeks. We're going to learn a lot more. So I think the expectation is just have a good day and then try to have another day after that, and just try to be consistent with your attitude and your performance on a day-to-day basis.
Jonathan and then Aaron. Nick, you talked about the roster still being in flux a little bit. Presumably behind Damien Pierce, are you satisfied with the way the running back room is? Is that a position you might target?
Yeah, I think the players that are on the team, we're comfortable with them, and otherwise they wouldn't be here. And if there's an opportunity for us to improve the situation, we kind of have to look at it in totality. It's not just about running back or running the ball or what that position entails. Those players are in competition with other players on the team, so you can only take 48 to the game each week. So you're either a starter on offense, you're a starter on defense, or you have a pretty significant role in the kicking game. So how do you build your depth on the team? That's what we try to look at. I think we've spent a lot of time over the last kind of 18 months trying to emphasize that. The kicking game's important. Those supplementary roles are important. So it's not about one particular thing. It's in totality. So if a player can do more things, it gives them an opportunity potentially to create a role for themselves on a team. Understand we're going to have to make anywhere from 5 to 7 players inactive each week that aren't going to be able to play. So I'd say we're always going to look at everything. If there's an opportunity that we feel makes sense, we'll consider it. And it's at what cost and in lieu of what player, and how does that affect the composition of the rest of the group.
Nick, with the waiver system, you guys were Tyler years. Your thoughts on Tyler, just kind of your knowledge of everything, what you saw.
Yeah, has some experience, productive player at the University of Minnesota, came from a good program, and PJ does a nice job, runs a good program. 5th round pick. I'd say, had some opportunities last season in Tampa behind some pretty good players down there. So I would say in their situation, I think they ended up keeping 6 or 7 receivers. I think Darden has a role in the kicking game. Miller's a fast guy, and they signed Julio. So it's kind of one of those situations where, it wasn't an opportunity for him there. Sure would have an opportunity elsewhere in the league. So, again, we don't really have a big commitment to him, but, he has some size, has decent playing strength. He has decent run after catch, has decent hands. So when we get him here, we'll see what it looks relative to the rest of the group. Again, it's about him taking advantage of the opportunities, and, if it's good enough, he'll be around. If it's not, then, we'll look for somebody else. But, he's been a decent player. He's been productive over the course of his career at different points, so I'm excited about the opportunity to add him to the club. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thank you. Can you just explain the decision to move on from Ross Blacklock?
Yeah, that was a tough decision. Ross was, a good player for the organization for a number of years. Local kid, has a lot of good athletic traits and attributes. We had pretty good competition at that position, at the defensive tackle position. So we ended up keeping, I think it was 5, including Heinisch, Dwumfor, and Book, and then Malik and Roy. So in the end, we just felt that, it was the best decision for the team. And it was an opportunity for him in Minnesota. They had expressed an interest. So, we thought that it made sense for us to give him that opportunity. So certainly wish him well. And hopefully they had success. I think Minnesota's putting together a good program with Coach O'Connell and Quasey, what they're doing kind of collectively as a team. Brian, we'll get after this one. Yep, go ahead.
What did you see when you were scouting Damien Pierce in college?
Yeah, I think he's been consistent, like a lot of players. I'd say the rookie class in general, for the most part, has been a pretty consistent group. I think Damien's been consistent since he got here. He's got a good attitude. He's got a good work ethic. Football is important to him. And I think when you go back and look at whether it was Florida, whether it was the Senior Bowl, whether it was the Combine, our different interactions with him, it's been pretty consistent. He just didn't really have an opportunity. Maybe as they split the carries at Florida. I mean, they had some good backs there. P. Ryan was there a couple years ago. DP was there. They had some different backs, through the years here. So when he had a chance, he was productive, with his touches. So I think he has, good lower body strength, good body balance, pretty instinctive, has good vision. So again, that's been a small sample, I would say, just on the field. So I certainly think he's got a lot of work ahead of him. Nobody's played a game yet. He's only carried the ball. I'd say a lot of our players, nobody's played a full game. They've probably played maximum called 30 to 35 snaps. So we're going to probably play 65, 70 snaps. Now I would say I think one of the things that we're going to try to do, what we try to do when we put the team together, if we have depth, try to use it. So just try to maximize our depth because we're going to need it at some point. It's a long year. I mean, this is week 1, but there's going to be 17 games there. So we're going to need everybody at some point.
There's just a few draft picks left from this organization before you came. Did you expect that big a turnover when you came here? Or did they say that happened for you? Or is that just how it is in the NFL now? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's just the NFL. I mean, you could look around the league and say there's players that are drafted that get released. There's players that are drafted that stick. There's players that are drafted that move on to other teams, other opportunities. So I think you just have to look at your situation. And it's a year-to-year endeavor. I think the one thing that probably I've learned being in the league 20-some-odd years, it's year-to-year. 1 year is different than the next year. So, and you can't just assume. So we just have to trust what we see. And we really, all of us, restart and recalibrate, the next year. So whatever happens in 2022, quite frankly, it's not going to matter. What happened in 2021 is not going to matter. We're focused on now. We're focused on what we need to do really to beat the Colts. And there's going to be change. And I would say there's consistent roster turnover year after year. 25, 30% of the team is going to turn over. So whether it's draft picks, whether it's free agent signings, whatever it is. So there's no one set way. There's no one set formula. So, we can't control that. The players ultimately control it with their performance. And then we just try to make the decisions that we feel are best for the organization.
You guys have been a lot into acquiring capital since you've been here, draft picks and cap space. Are y'all yet in a position where you feel like you could make a more major move to acquire another player and either draft picks for players or something like that? As wide receiver, big need to do that.
Yeah, there's no set blueprint. So how you accumulate assets, I mean, it's going to change year to year. So whatever you have, then you try to take that information and you try to make good decisions. So any decision that you make, there's a residual effect on something else. So there's always a cost associated with doing something. So what's the cost associated with player acquisition in lieu of what? So does that make sense for your team? So again, we're always going to do, I've said this from day one, we're always going to do what we feel is in the best interest of our team and try to make good decisions. And it's not going to be one person making that decision. It's going to be in conjunction, with Lovey and the staff. And if there's something that we feel is out there that makes sense, we'll consider. If not, then we won't. So I don't want to make it kind of black and white or just make it very simple, but I think that's the reality of it. There's no blueprint that says you have to acquire X number of draft picks. Okay, once you do that, then you can go out and trade for, Mr. X. Okay, well, there's always a cost associated with acquiring a player. So when you trade for a player and you give up draft capital, then there's usually going to be a commensurate contract that goes along with that. So then that's going to be at the cost of whatever else there is. So all those factors that go into it. So it's never going to be about one player. It's never going to be about one person. We're going to look at the totality of the team, and we're going to do what we feel is in the best interest of the organization, as long as I'm in the position that I'm in.
What did you see from Dave's Fields in training camp and preseason, and what steps do you feel like he needs to take?
Yeah, that whole group, I would say, Jeff and Kyle included, made a lot of progress during the course of training camp. So I'd say for the most part, they all made good decisions. They took care of the football for the most part. So quarterback play is about making the right decision at the right time, under duress, and just making sure that you don't put the team in a compromised position where you lose the game. So Davis is a smart kid. He works hard. He has good athletic traits and attributes. So, again, he played whatever the snapshot was in preseason. There's going to be a lot more snaps ahead of him. So I think the most important thing for all of our players is to take advantage of every opportunity, every snap when you're in there, and just try to take advantage of the play to the best of your ability and just try to do the right thing. But quarterback play comes down to decision making, take care of the football, accuracy, and throwing the ball on time. So if you can do those things at that position, you're going to have success, and it's not going to be about one person. He handles the ball on just 99% of the plays, let's say, unless, you run a wildcat or something like that. So that player is entrusted with a lot of responsibility, but it entails everybody else doing their job as well. The offensive line, the tight ends, the receivers, and the running backs. So Davis has an opportunity in front of him. I think he's excited about the opportunity. I think our team is excited about the opportunity. But the bottom line, it's about production, and it's about going out there and playing effectively. That's the most important thing. Go ahead, Brandon.
I wanted to ask you about the edge rushers that y'all brought in. You signed several veteran edge rushers. We got to see Jerry Hughes last game. What is the specific that you like about Jerry Hughes, sort of that veteran that you brought in, and how much did sort of that approach or strategy factor in your draft decision to kind of in that direction, going the veteran route with the edge rushers?
Yeah, to the first part of your question, what do we like about Jerry? I would say everything. I mean, this guy has been a rock star since the day he arrived. And when you see a player from afar, you really don't know exactly sort of what makes him tick. He was a pain in the ass for us in New England. I would say almost more in the running game than he was as a pass rusher because of his ability to rip inside and be disruptive, kind of split double teams. I mean, he was hard to block. And he was always out there. So here's a guy that's been in the league 12 years. There's a reason that he's made it this far. He's very diligent. He's very professional. He has good leadership. Players respect him. And he can still perform, I would say, at a pretty good level. I mean, that's the most important thing because it's about production. But Jerry's done a great job. I mean, he's got a great relationship with Jacques. I mean, I think, that whole group has done a great job. Jacques is Jacques' a really good coach. I mean, we're fortunate to have him. And he's done a great job with that group. I mean, Jerry was a player. We actually didn't sign him until after the draft, so we weren't even sure, if we had him or not. I would say we had agreed with Mario before the draft, so we had kind of factored that in, and we had some other things that were going on. But again, it's about acquiring good football players, however we get them here. So if we draft them, just because we were signing X number of players, it doesn't necessarily take us out of drafting another player. So you can only draft one at each spot, so you just try to take the information, try to make good decisions. But just specific to your question about Jerry, I mean, Jerry's been awesome to work with. He really has.
Dave,
Go ahead, Deep.
what did you like about Kurt Hinish when you signed him as an undrafted? And has he surpassed the expectations you had for him just by making the position?
Yeah, kind of going to Brian's question, one of the things about Curry's a very consistent player. So he's a 3-year starter, a good program. I mean, I think everybody would agree Notre Dame's got a pretty good program, played pretty good defense. He was a pretty instinctive player. I'd say, he's not the tallest, he's not the strongest, but he knows how to play football. So we're in the business of acquiring good football players, regardless of what they look like or how big or small they might be. But he does a good job using his hands, playing with leverage, and he was on the field. I'd say, so those are some of the qualities that we liked. And again, he was undrafted, so it was about giving him an opportunity, but he had done enough. I think he was a 3-year starter. So I'd say different than Lopez, but I'd say some of the same conversations we kind of had about Roy, even going back a year ago. Roy got here. I mean, he was whatever he was, a 6th-round pick, and I'm not sure anybody was sure what we really had. I think Roy has probably exceeded that. We'll see how it goes with Kurt. I mean, he's really played in the preseason. Now obviously going to be a different situation. Nothing's guaranteed, but he's got a good attitude. He works hard. We've got a lot of respect for Coach Kelly and was Coach Kelly in a program that he ran at Notre Dame. So, Kurt's done a nice job, and, we'll see what happens here as we move forward.
There's a lot of young players, specifically rookies, that are going to be getting a lot of playing time from the get-go, and not just talking at the top of the first round, but also Damien Pierce, who we talked about earlier, Jalen Petrie. Is that something you envisioned when you were in the draft boardroom and making these decisions a couple months ago?
Yeah, you really don't know how it's going to go. For every draft pick you have, every player that you select, how's it going to turn out? Quite honestly, you really don't know. You're taking a player and everything that comes along with it because there are some qualities that you like in that particular player. So what does that look like when they actually get here on campus relative to the rest of the group? You really don't know. I mean, even if you look at the Colts, I mean, there's a good example. I think they kept 2 or 3 undrafted players. Denbaugh, the safety from SMU, who, let's say, wasn't very highly thought of, but, he's been one of the most productive players in the kicking game in the league. JoJo Doman wasn't drafted, so I would say all throughout the league you look around. There's undrafted players, there's late-round picks that end up making teams. So you bring new players in every year, you evaluate your team, you evaluate your situation, and you try to make the right decision. And you really don't have a crystal ball about how it's going to go. So, look, if a player gets picked higher than some of the others, there's probably a certain expectation and level of performance that you're hoping, but it doesn't always work out. We've seen plenty of situations, players around the league drafted in the first round. Let's use Leatherwood as an example. There's a guy who's a good player, drafted in the first round, and he's cut. So it happens. So it's just the reality of what we deal with. So bring the players into your program, try to identify some traits and characteristics that you like in those players, and then when you get here, everybody has an equal opportunity. It's equal competition, and we'll keep the best 53 plus 16, however it goes, and then we'll have to do that, I'd say, on a year-to-year basis.
So when you go ahead and look at this year's draft class, all that players making less than 13 this year's staff. What does that say about the maturity of how they've adapted to playing at the professional level, how they've adjusted to the actual speed?
Yeah, I think it speaks to the coaches. I think it speaks to the player, and I think it speaks to everybody involved in the process. So they've been given an opportunity. I think the rookie class in general, they've had a good attitude. They've got a good work ethic. They care. It's important to them. They're very competitive, and it's not too big for them. Now, obviously, it's going to get a little bit bigger a week from Sunday, so it's going to be an adjustment, and they're going to be in a situation where they haven't been in before. So some of the players are going to play. Some players aren't going to play. Some players might play a little bit later in the year. So you have to be ready at any point, but I think it's a credit to the players. I think it's a credit to the coaches. I think it's a credit to their teammates as well for embracing them and kind of giving them the opportunity to be a part of the team. And it speaks to some of the veterans in our locker room. A guy like Hughes, working, or, Malik and Roy working with a guy like Heinisch. So, because in the end, the players have to trust one another and depend on one another. There's only so much that we're going to be able to do sitting in the stands, watching a game, or standing on the sideline. So, again, we're fortunate and we're grateful for the players that are here. Hopefully we can go out there and turn it into tangible production and performance on the field, and, we'll see where that goes.
Cody. Can you talk about the decision to part ways with Chris Conley and along those same lines? Can you talk about how different it was evaluating wide receiver this year?
Yeah. Again, we look at every position the same, we'll evaluate in totality. I'd say there's a pretty good shot Chris is going to be back on the team. So, I think Chris has been a professional since the day that he got here. He's got a good attitude. He's got a good approach. He's well respected by, his teammates, well respected by the coaching staff. So I would expect Chris to probably be back around here probably sooner rather than later. So I think, every position, kind of like we talked about some of the other questions, are we comfortable with the depth? Are we comfortable with the players at that position? If the player's here, we're comfortable with that player on the team, and they have to earn their role and create their role, whatever that is, on a week-to-week basis. And it's about 11 guys on the field performing at an optimum level, on a consistent level. It's not going to be about one player, one particular thing.
What was it like
Go ahead, Sarge.
what was it like going through this process of coaching?
It was awesome. It was awesome. We talked, I would say, fairly regularly, obviously, over the last, probably 5 to 7 days. But I think our job, and we have fiduciary responsibility to each other. Me to him to me, it's reciprocal. I think he's very open-minded. And what we try to do is take all the information in from the staff as well, because from a coach's perspective, and I've been in that situation, you invest a lot of time, a lot of energy on a professional level, on a personal level with that player. So their viewpoint, their opinion of that player, their interaction with the player, like that matters to us. So it'd be irresponsible of us not to take that information in. Ultimately, Lovey and I have to sit, we have to take everything in, and then make the decisions that we feel make the most sense for our team. So Lovey's been great to work with, since day one, not just going down, cutting the roster, but Lovey's well respected. He has the attention of the team. He commands a lot from the team, and they've responded in favor. So it's been good to work with him. And, I'm sure there's going to be some things that we're going to have to deal with between now and the end of the season. And I think the only way you do that is you have honest, open communication, are respectful of one another, and ultimately we'll have to make a decision, live with our decisions, and then move forward.
As you try to figure out whether Davis Mills is the long-term answer of this franchise, what type of things do you look for, or where you got to be?
Yeah, with all due respect, I'm not really focused on the long term. I'm focused on next week and just trying to have a good week in preparation for the Colts. So that's where our focus is as a team. That's what we're worried about, and just try to go out there and execute and prepare and get ready to play the Colts, who are a good team. So that's where the focus is. I'm not worried about next year. I'm not worried about a long-term answer. I'm worried about the here and now and the present and what we do as a football team. We're about next year. Go ahead, Aaron.
For Hairston, we show you guys, really, I said
Yeah, I mean, Troy's an interesting, I'd say, case or situation. So really, he played defensive end and the line of scrimmage at CMU. Fire up Chips. I was a Chippewa for about 6 months. But anyways, and I would say, not to, God bless you, not to toot the horn of one of our area scouts, but Najee Johnson, who was at the pro day at Central Michigan, was a part, and we put a lot on our college scouts during the course of the spring. When we're at a workout, is we evaluate the workout, what happened in a workout, what did you see, sending information back to us. And one of the things that he put in his write-up was Troy did all the drills at defensive end, he did them all at linebacker, then he worked them out as a fullback, and this might be an opportunity potentially maybe develop a fullback, because I would say if you look at this position throughout the league, very few fullbacks were fullbacks. They come from another position. So you go look at Ricard in Baltimore. The guy was a 290-pound defensive tackle. Now he's playing fullback. We had James Devlin in New England. He played defensive end at Brown, and we made him an all-pro fullback. So, again, it wasn't about what we did, but playing fullback is about a mentality. It's about a mindset. It's about a toughness. And I would say when you look at Troy, he had certain athletic traits and attributes that we thought potentially had the opportunity to translate. Now, when a player never does something, then you really don't know. You can't say, oh, yeah, we're going to have potentially a starting fullback. So I think it was a good example of the process and kind of how we worked through that process. And I think there was a hope and an expectation based on his physical attributes and characteristics, he would have an opportunity to compete in the kicking game. So if you start with the kicking game, which I would say players have their best chance, especially early on, to make an impact in the kicking game, then you work backwards, then you try to figure out what their role might be offensively. So Troy's got a long way to go, but nobody works harder. Well, Troy works as hard as anybody. He's got a great attitude. He wants to get better each day. He wants to improve. And, when he's been on the field, he's had some positive plays. So we'll see if he can continue that moving forward. Yeah, I'd say all our rookies are probably about the same point. Like, some have been out there pretty much a majority of the time. Derek was eventually out there, so have gone out there. They've performed at a certain level. I think that there's going to be a big transition between, I would say, this week and into next week in preparation for the Colts and an opponent. So, I think the most important thing is just focus on your skill set, focusing on what you have to do, what your job is at that position. So from that perspective, Derek's had a good attitude and a good approach.
Hey, can you talk about where you are on the offensive line, how you feel about the depth and the decisions made there? Looking at shore it up, or how do you feel about the whole line?
Yeah, I would say most teams probably have sort of 8 to 10 on the roster, and then probably another, call it a 2 to 4 off the roster on the practice squad. So again, however many players you have, they're potentially available for you. So I think the players that we have on the roster and then including off the roster, Jimmy Morrissey to the practice squad, Cedric to the practice squad. So those are players that were here that we have experience with. So however you have your depth, however you form your depth. So, I would say the players that are here we feel good about. Again, going back to an earlier question, if there's an opportunity for us to improve a position or we feel we can actually make it better, then we'll consider it. But it's not just take a name, stick it there, and all of a sudden we think it's better. There has to be something tangible behind it. So, the players that we have here, they all work hard. I think, the tackles, some of the ability to potentially swing from right to left to right, and then inside, being able to create some versatility, whether it's, are you just a center? Can you play all 3 inside spots, center, both guard spots? You're just a guard. Because you're going to take 7 of the game, really 8. You can bring 8, but you have a backup for the edge, you have a backup for the inside positions, and your 8th guy is sort of a bonus or an extra just per the rules. So that's what it is each week. That's what it is for every other team in the NFL. So, if there's an opportunity for us to improve that, we will. If there's not, we feel comfortable with the players that are in the building.
Okay, we have time for a couple more.
Hang on here.
Yes.
With the work you had cut out for you when you first got here to where you are now, what do you like about the way the roster has been shaped?
Yeah, it's really not about where I think the roster is. I think you just look at the totality of where our program is. We had a lot of work to do when I got here. There's still a lot of work for us to do. If we want to be consistently considered one of the good organizations in the league, we have a lot of work in front of us. If we're just being honest with each other, we've won 4 games each of the past 2 years, so it's not nearly good enough. So it's not nearly going to be good enough this year. So I think the most important thing for us is to keep chipping away, try to make progress, try to bring good players in the building, try to bring good people in the building, try to be conscientious, try try to be consistent with our performance day to day, and ultimately we're going to be judged on what we do on the field. So, again, that's how I'm approaching it. That's my approach. I mean, it's on the here and now. It's not about next year. It's not about like what draft pick we're going to use next year. That's not what the focus is. So I think we're excited about the start of the season. The preseason's behind us. Now it's a time for all of us to recalibrate. The players are going to have a chance to recalibrate here, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, take a deep breath, and then really it's time to get to work.
To follow up on Vanessa's question earlier about Ross Blacklock, you also moved on from Matt Sharp with the second round pick. You mentioned earlier, too, of course, that you have to earn your playing time here. It doesn't matter where you pick. But is there ever a part of you in the back of your mind thinking to yourself, well, other teams might have had a second round grade on him. Maybe they can get more out of him?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. Like, we don't grade by rounds. Like, that's not how our grading system is built, so we really don't care where a player was picked or what round he was picked in. So I would say specific to Max, I mean, that was a tough one. I mean, nobody's as respected on a team as Max Sharping. So he's done a lot of good things. He started a lot of football games. He's smart. He's tough. He's played a lot of good football. In the end, we just felt like this was the right decision for our team. He's going to have a good opportunity in Cincinnati, going to a good team. So, again, we can't really worry about what other teams think. We just have to worry about the Houston Texans and what we think. Max is a good player. This isn't about Max. He's not a good enough player. It's just where we were right now. We just felt this was the best decision for us, and that's how we handled it. That's how we approached it.
Nick, what do you think about Kenyon Green, where's that right now?
Yeah, he's missed a lot of time. There's a lot of catch-up work. Anytime you miss, 12, 13 days of practice, whatever it is. So he had an opportunity to play, the other night. I think the biggest thing is getting ready to play, more extensive snaps if he's going to be able to do it, build up your stamina, build up your conditioning, continue to work on your techniques. And we're going to face, arguably two of the better interior defensive tackles, I would say, week one, and Buckner. And then, Grover, I'd say is probably underrated, Grover Stewart, relative to the rest of the league. So we got two big-ass guys on the inside of the Colts front that we're going to have to deal with. So, we're going to have to be prepared to block them. We're going to have to be prepared to block the guys on the edge and Quiddy and Ngagwe. So we're going to have a big challenge in front of us. So I would say we still got a lot of work in front of us. Kenyon certainly has a lot of work in front of him as well, but he's had a good attitude. He's had a good approach. I think he is just in the stage of continue to build on some of the things that he's done and try to stay consistent, day after day, week after week. Take one more.
What is it that you have to see in Marlon Mack that you haven't yet for him to be a part of the 53?
Yeah, everything we do, we're going to look at week to week, day to day. So we're going to look at our team. We're going to figure out what we need for the game, what makes the most sense. Mac's is a good player. We're glad he's here. We're excited to continue to work with him. If there's an opportunity for him or anybody else on a practice squad or anybody else in the league that we can add to the roster, then we'll consider it. All right. Thanks, guys.